Take the DLR to Island Gardens, alight there, and head towards the riverside. Follow the path around, and eventually you'll come to this. It doesn't look like much, but this is one of the few surviving reminders of one of the most remarkable ships ever built. This is where the Great Eastern was launched. If you've never heard of the Great Eastern, she was the last ship designed by the legendary engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Brunel was a man who liked to think big. He referred to the Great Eastern as his Great Babe. His first ship was the Great Western, which in 1837 was the largest ship in the world, intended to run the first regular scheduled transatlantic voyages. Cynical early critics suggested she was too big to be economically viable. "I'll show you," said Mr. Brunel, and he built her anyway. He followed this up with the Great Britain, which was, again, the largest ship in the world. Not only that, but she was built of iron and powered by the then revolutionary technology of a screw propeller. Oh wait, revolutionary, because it turns. I've only just spotted that. Anyway, yes. Some maritime historians even consider the Great Britain to be the first ocean liner. Well, how do you top that? "Easy," said Brunel, and set to work on a bigger ship still. This was going to go all the way to Australia. What was more, she would be able to get there and back without refuelling. She would be powered by sails and paddle wheels and a screw propeller. She would be 6 times larger than any vessel afloat, and she was to be called the Leviathan. Brunel checked his calculations with naval architect John Scott Russell, who declared that it could be done, but it wouldn't be easy. In 1852, the Eastern Steam Navigation Company agreed to take the vessel on. Brunel reckoned she would cost $500,000 to build. "I'll do it for $358,000, said John Scott Russell. His own shipyard was too small, so another one nearby was leased. It's at this point that I should probably quote some figures at you to give you some idea of the size we're talking here. She would weigh 32,192 tons. She would be 692 feet long. Her paddle wheels would be 56 feet high, and her propeller 24 feet wide. She would need 5 engines and 6 masts. She would have the capacity for 4,000 passengers and a tonnage of 18,915. She was to be so long that she would have to be launched sideways. And to give you some idea of the human scale of the vessel, that famous photo of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the one where he's standing in front of the enormous chains, those are the Great Eastern's anchor chains. On the 1st of May 1854, the keel was laid down. In early 1856, a problem became apparent. It seemed that Russell was not as solvent as he pretended to be. The work on the Leviathan was nowhere near as advanced as it needed to be. Russell was bankrupt, and the bank took possession of the yard. After negotiation, the Eastern Steam Navigation Company took over construction. Brunel was forced to rush the ship to completion despite his protests. On the 3rd of November 1857, the ship was ready for launch. Well, it wasn't, really. Not to Brunel's satisfaction, but that was the date they'd agreed. To give you some idea of how unprepared things were, they weren't even sure whether the ship was to be named Leviathan or Great Eastern. And so the day arrived, and, to Brunel's dismay, the company had decided to try to recoup some losses by selling tickets to the launch. The directors of the company asked what the ship was to be christened, and Brunel angrily replied, "Call her Tom Thumb if you like." Leviathan it was. The ship was christened, the winches engaged, the capstans turned, the great ship groaned down the slipway, and stopped. She was stuck. It was a humiliating turn of events for the company and for Brunel himself. She stayed there for months, a hulking embarrassment. Attempts to move her with winches and hydraulic rams failed. One helpful soul even suggested marching a platoon of soldiers around the deck to vibrate the ship free. In the end, the powerful hydraulic rams supplied by the new Tanjai Company were what got the ship moving on the 31st of January 1858. Richard Tanjai would later famously quip, "We launched the Great Eastern, and she launched us." Oh yes, in July the ship was renamed SS Great Eastern, I should probably mention that. But it wasn't, plain sailing from here on in. The maiden voyage was set for the 6th of September, having been delayed from August. On the 9th of September, off Hastings, a feedwater heater burst. The explosion was colossal, so powerful that one of the funnels was literally launched into the air. 5 men were gruesomely killed by the superheated steam and several more injured. Repairs to the ship were carried out by John Scott Russell. The lost funnel would later be salvaged and can now be seen in Bristol. Brunel, however, was unable to give an opinion on the situation. On the 5th of September he suffered a stroke and died 10 days later, aged only 53. It is often speculated that stress and overwork contributed to his decline. That may well be so. Brunel was the quintessential workaholic, and he had been in poor health for some time. The Great Eastern would prove to be an economic failure. It was judged that there was insufficient trade to justify using her on the Far East route, so she was instead used on transatlantic voyages, where her size and relatively slow speed compared to other ships on the route were a disadvantage. Her first voyage took longer than planned due to a poorly planned route and the crew being too drunk to sail. Subsequent transatlantic voyages were not much more successful, although there was an incident during these early voyages that I think is worthy of note. It happened on the 17th of August, 1862. While making her way into port at New York, the ship brushed against something. The captain sent an officer down to check, who reported that everything was fine. When the ship arrived in port, the captain was informed that she was listing. "Now, mate," said the captain, "it was only when they docked that they discovered the truth of the matter. The ship had sustained a gash in her hull, 80 feet in length by 4 feet in width. Now, to put things into perspective, the holes that sank the Titanic totalled 12 square feet. Thanks to Brunel's double hull, the Great Eastern had survived. But still, repairs took time and cost money. Between this, other accidents and poor patronage, the company started losing money rapidly. A consortium led by Daniel Gooch, director of the Eastern Steam Navigation Company and good friend of Brunel, bought the ship for £25,000 in 1864, a fraction of what she was worth. They had a plan. There was much demand for a transatlantic telegraph cable, and there was only one ship big enough to take the job on. So the Great Eastern was stripped out and converted into a cable-laying ship, her former passenger accommodation holding the thousands of miles of cable needed to get to America. At last, the Great Eastern had a purpose. For the time being, anyway. After a highly successful career connecting the nations of the world, the question arose, what now? What indeed? She once again was tried as an ocean liner, but failed to attract custom. She became a showboat, a floating concert hall, and finally suffered the indignity of being turned into a floating advertisement for Lewis department store in Liverpool. In 1888 she was sold for scrap. It took 18 months to break the massive ship up. So that's the sad story of the Great Eastern, or the Leviathan, or the Great Babe, or Tom Thumb if you like. She was undoubtedly a great engineering achievement, and wouldn't be surpassed in size until 1913, over half a century after her launch. But it seems she was ahead of her time, a ship without a purpose. Little remains of the vessel today. The aforementioned funnel in Bristol, a topmast which serves as a flagpole at Anfield Football Ground, and of course, these timbers at Millwall.